our 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider. Also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. John McMullen joins us on a Monday. John, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
So we know that the Eagles, let's first start off with the trade, if you really want to call it that. It more seems like a Eagles salvaging a guy who they probably weren't going to keep on the roster. It seems like to me that moving Brooks is a sign of two things to me, John. One, that they're very happy with Corey Graham and Jalen Watkins back there in the secondary, especially considering you mentioned last week Watkins and his versatility. And the second thing is, to me, I look at Dexter McDougal. I don't think he's a great player per se, but I do think maybe he's in here to challenge C.J. Smith and Aaron Grimes for that back end of the roster spots.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is true. The Eagles are very, very comfortable with Corey Graham. Not so much with Jalen Watkins. I think he still remains a bubble player, and we'll see how things kind of shake out. And I think Dexter McDougal's here to compete for the nickelback slot. I think that's where he is. He's a talented guy, and I don't think Jim Schwartz knows what he has with Ron Brooks and the injuries. He was out of practice again today, Patrick Robinson. So I think right now at that particular position, the Eagles are sort of throwing the darts at the dartboard and hoping something works out, and we'll see how it shakes out. But I think Terrence took a big step back when he missed that tackle on the long touchdown against the Dolphins, because that's sort of the strength of his game is supposed to be as a hitter and intimidator. And the Eagles were kind of going to move forward with Corey Graham as the third safety. Chris Maragos, remember, is going to be here for his special teams acumen. And then they may keep Jalen Watkins as sort of the 9th or 10th defensive back, but that, I think all of that will shake out on Thursday.
I know for those out there that Dexter McDougal is a really fast guy. He was a speedy player in college. He also went to high school with Torrey Smith. So to give people an idea of kind of his age range, talk a little bit about what do you think Dexter McDougal is? Do you think he's just here for special teams like he was with the Jets? Or do you think he can genuinely compete for maybe one of the cornerback depth spots?
I think he could generally compete. It's tough. It's so late in the process, but he's a former third-round pick. It's interesting, and so is Terrence, for that matter. So, and from the same draft, so it's sort of like a failed third-round pick for a failed third-round pick. But I think, obviously, the Eagles are not confident, and at least fully, in Ron Brooks or Patrick Robinson as the nickel corner. So this is a way to add another body to see if he can open some eyes. And he's got some physical gifts, but as you mentioned, it never really translated as far as the Jets. But after Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills, the cornerback position remains a big, big question mark for the Eagles. And he's another name in the mix. Obviously, Rasul Douglas is going to be here as a third-round pick. He's going to be on the roster. But he's going to be more that guy who sort of doesn't press on game days, and they sort of redshirt him for a year. So as far as who's going to be in the mix, he's another name.
John Deshaun, you write on our website, 973ESPN.com, that Peterson insists Foles is okay, basically talking about what's been going on with Foles all preseason long and off season. He says that he'll be ready for week 1, yet we haven't seen Foles in any preseason games. He hasn't really been available for practice. And as I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, John, Foles, it seems to always be injured when you need him to play.
Well, he was back out there at practice today, so that's a positive development. But remember, he was back at practice for 2 days and then kind of fell out again. And that's where people have a concern. And the fact is, he hasn't taken, as you mentioned, a live rep in a preseason game. And Doug is very confident in him. He doesn't believe he needs to see him work in the preseason. So it comes down to the fact, is he going to be healthy enough week 1? This is the way I spin it. Look, everybody's in a bad situation in this league if you lose your starting quarterback. So if Carson Wentz goes down for an extended period of time, the Eagles are in trouble with Nick Foles without him. However, in a division that projects to be won by 1 or 2 games, you need a competent backup quarterback in case something happens for a week or two, whether it's a sprained ankle, whether it's a concussion. I believe Nick Foles can handle that role competently and get the Eagles over the hump. I'm not sure Matt McMullen could, and that's the concern. And when you start framing it that way and thinking about if he's needed for a game or two to win the NFC East, well, you want Nick Foles out there. You don't want Matt McMullen out there.
John, going into the final week of the preseason, we've talked all offseason long about the wide receivers and if the Eagles will keep 5 or 6. How many do you believe that they'll actually keep, and what are your projection if they keep 5? Who are the 5? And if they keep 6, who are your 6?
Well, I still have them keeping 6. It could be 5, but depending on some other positions. But right now I still think it'll be 6, considering they're going to be in 11 personnel like most teams in the NFL. So that means 3 receivers are going to be on the field more often than not, and you need some bodies. And if that's the case, I've always said the gimmies obviously are Alshon Jeffrey, Torrey Smith, Nelson Aguilar, and Mac Hollins. They're going to make the team. Those 4 you don't have to worry about. And from there, the leaders in the clubhouse coming into Thursday are Marcus Johnson and Bryce Treggs for that 5th and 6th slot. And it's a tough week. I mean, Johnson he is a guy from the Houston area, talked today. So he's got concerns about his family and friends down there. And he's got to go out on Thursday and play well to make this football team.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles Insider also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. You check out all of John's work over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Also follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. John, sticking with the wide receivers, how much run do you think we're going to see of those younger guys? Because we know the stars aren't going to play in this 4th game. So are we expecting to see a lot of guys like Treggs and Ward and Gibson and Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see a heck of a lot. I mean, unfortunately, some guys got to play. I mean, numbers necessitate it. And obviously, in the case of Johnson and Treggs and Shelton Gibson and Greg Ward and all those guys, they're going to play significant amount of snaps. And as I said, when you're an Alshon Jeffrey, you can sort of take off week 4. And nobody worries about it. But when you're on the back end of an NFL roster, I mean, this is a big week for you. And it is for those guys. And not only because the guys who are going to get cut, obviously, are trying to not only open the Eagles' eyes to make sure they bring them back on the practice squad, but there's also 31 other NFL teams. And Frank Reich talked today that he thinks one of his 2 receivers might be playing elsewhere in this league after they get cut here. So the Eagles are a heck of a lot deeper than they were last year at that position, and they're going to cut some guys that probably have NFL talent.
Staying on the offensive side of the ball, Doug Peterson said after the last preseason game that he told Clement and Pumphrey that he wants them to make it hard decision for him when it comes down to the cuts. So if we see a lot of Clement and Pumphrey, what kind of scenarios can you see coming out of that 4th preseason game?
Well, I'll say this. I can't imagine the Eagles will cut Donnell Pumphrey. They might sort of come up with a wink-wink hamstring injury and put him on injured reserve. I can't even imagine them trying to get him through waivers and get him on the practice squad. The other scenario for me would be keeping him on the 53-man roster and just not dressing him on game days. He's clearly not ready to play at this stage, and it's going to be a season spent redshirting, trying to get bigger, trying to get stronger. trying to be able to hold up in the NFL environment. So he's going to be here. The question is, how is he going to be here? For Corey, I've said, he's the type of player what the practice squad is made for. He's got some talent as a runner, but there's a lot of other aspects of playing that position at the NFL level, most notably catching the football. He's not really good at that at this point, and also he's a work in progress, as most rookies are, when it comes to pass protection and picking up the blitz. So ultimately, I think Corey Clement is going to be on the practice squad. And I could see, as I said, I could see the Eagles sort of stashing Pumphrey on injured reserve and going outside the organization to find a fourth running back.
John, also on the offensive line is a position that they're going to have to decide. We know that after trading away two guys who can play tackle, and Alan Barber and Matt Tobin, that the Eagles are left with Taylor Hart and Dylan Gordon. And John, I never thought at this point in the process on August 28th, I would be asking you if there is a potential battle for the final offensive line depth spot between Gordon and Hart, of all people.
Yeah, I wouldn't have, it would shock me as well if Taylor Hart made this team, but his name keeps getting mentioned, and that makes you raise an eyebrow. That tells you the coaching staff sees something, and they may be at least thinking about it. Ultimately, I think Gordon's going to be here simply because of his versatility. He not only plays left tackle, he's been this team's fullback in the preseason, and he played tight end at LSU, so he's very comfortable being that extra tight end in those jumbo packages. So it's going to be him. But you're right. I mean, when this started, we looked at the Eagles' depth on the offensive line, and it was really, really impressive. It's still pretty good inside with Stefan Wisniewski and Chance Warmack. But outside, it's not nearly as good. And Vaitai is going to be your swing tackle. And there was I think a 4-play span where he had 3 penalties against Miami.
Yep.
So I don't think well, I know he's not nearly as good as Alan Barber was in that role. So now all of a sudden you have to hold your breath. It's not going to come up, obviously, if Jason Peters and Lane Johnson are able to stay healthy. But the depth is not nearly as good as it once looked.
John, I want to go national now, and Hugh Jackson named Deshaun Kaiser the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. Kind of take us through the situation, because we talked a couple of months ago about how Kaiser really wasn't ready to play. Kessler was the leader in the clubhouse. Osweiler, they still wanted to give a look. To now, Kessler, he might not even make the team. Osweiler, they don't even know if they want, and Kaiser is the starter.
Yeah, that's how. Well, number one, it tells you just how poorly Cody Kessler's performed this summer. Because you're right. I mean, Kevin Hogan might have overtaken him, and it's an astonishing fall considering where he was, where we started this thing. I don't think any of the rookie quarterbacks are ready to play right away, but the Cleveland Browns are desperate. They don't have a quarterback, and Deshaun Kaiser is the best one they have available. And there's 2 schools of thought. There's one, and I advocate this for the Chicago Bears as well, because they're going to have a bad football team, but they at least have Mike Glennon to sort of be a placeholder for Mitchell Trubisky. I would have started Brock Osweiler just because I don't want Kaiser just losing consistently and sort of eroding his confidence and getting beat up. I do think the Browns will have a pretty good offensive line this year. They're much improved at that area, but they're just not ready to compete. And I think you've seen it with Blake Bortles in Jacksonville, what it can do to a young quarterback's confidence if they start losing and losing and losing. It can turn what is a really good prospect into a bust. And I don't agree with the way Hugh Jackson has gone about this.
When you look over in Buffalo, and they made another trade today, trading away Reggie Ragland to the Kansas City Chiefs, is this a team that they're just clearly looking towards next year, and guys like LaShawn McCoy and Tyrod Taylor are basically one-year rentals?
Well, certainly looking that way for Taylor. I mean, I think they know Shady is a really good back. I don't think there's any question about that. But we know how this league is, and the fact that you can move on from players, and it's generally year to year. And there's no question there's a new regime in Buffalo, and Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane had no skin in the game when it came to some of these players they're trading away, Reggie Ragland being the latest. So they're intent on getting people in that they want, and obviously they're accruing significant draft choices next year. They have 2 in the first round, 2 in the second round, 2 in the third round. Now they have an extra 1 in the fourth round. So they're going to be able to move up and down if they see a quarterback, for instance, that they want. But, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a significant change, obviously, over the next calendar year continuing in Buffalo.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles Insider also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, another guy who was announced to be the starting quarterback. So it looks like we got Josh McCown is going to be the man, which I think a lot of people expected, right? Because Hackenberg is nowhere far along enough, and Bryce Petty just hasn't been able to stay healthy. At the end of the day, McCown's pretty much a placeholder, kind of like how Deshaun mentioned about how Tyrod Taylor might be for the Bills. And then you guys mentioned Blake Bortles. It seems like you have a lot of quarterback positions, whether it's San Francisco, Jacksonville, the Jets, the Bills. You have a lot of teams right now that have quarterbacks who are basically just keeping the seat warm until next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's always that way, though. I mean, if you don't have the answer at the position, obviously somebody's got to play, and you're always looking for the next guy. And unfortunately, there's a lot of teams in that position, the Jets being at the top of the list. I mean, the fact that Josh McCown is a 38-year-old journeyman who's 2-20 in his last 22 starts, and he didn't win that job. He ran away from competition. I mean, Hackenberg's not even close to Josh McCown, which tells you all you need to know about him. Because the mentality with coaches is never give anything to anyone. But when you bring in Josh McCown as your competition, well, you're supposed to win. You're supposed to win that competition. And as I said, Hackenberg wasn't even in the game. He was just awful this entire summer. And if Bryce Petty's healthy, Todd Bowles is going to go with Bryce Petty as the backup. And ultimately, I find it hard to believe that the Jets will not look to get another quarterback in there, because it is evident that Christian Hackenberg is not the future for that organization.
John, the news came out this morning about the possibility that Vontaze Burfict is going to be suspended for 5 games for an illegal hit on Sherman of the Chiefs. And, you know, John, this is a guy, he's been fined over $290,000 in his career. He's already suspended for 3 games for the hit on Brown. I know some people think that this suspension isn't warranted, but couldn't I argue, John, that this is a guy who has a reputation, and it seems like he just hasn't gotten the message from the league, and maybe he has to be suspended for more games?
Yeah, I'm on the other side of that fence, because I saw the hit, and it's not an illegal hit, and they are suspending him because of his past history. And, you know, I mean, that's a slippery slope. You can say those things about Burfict, and they're true, but let's wait for something where you can argue it's an illegal hit. I mean, he led with his shoulder, and to have that type of suspension, you're obviously sort of penalizing him for his misdeeds of the past. I don't think that's right. One of the issues, obviously a totally different incident, but that's where this league got in trouble with Ray Rice, is that they suspended him, they made a mistake, and they tried to suspend him again, and they got in trouble from a legal standpoint. You can't legislate past mistakes by saying, okay, we're going to do the makeup call, so to speak. So I don't think they should have acted the way they did, but it seems when it comes to personal conduct or on-field suspensions or anything of that nature, 50% of the people agree with this league and 50% don't, and mainly because it lacks credibility. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
John, staying in the AFC North today, the Ravens gave head coach John Harbaugh an extra year contract extension through the 2019 season. This is a team that's missed the playoffs 3 of the last 4 seasons. Do you think Harbaugh needs to get this team back to the playoffs the next 2 years for him to keep his job?
You could argue he still needs to make the playoffs to keep his job this year. I mean, the fact that he's not a lame duck any longer. Coaches rarely go into seasons as lame ducks. Marvin Lewis is an exception this year, but Cincinnati tends to run things in a different way than most of the other leagues, most of the other teams in this league. From Baltimore's standpoint, you knew they were always going to announce the 1-year extension at some point to make sure that John wasn't the lame duck. But they could move on. I don't think they should. I'm not advocating it. They've had so many injury issues already. It's going to be really, really difficult for that team to make the playoffs. And I still think John Harbaugh is a very good coach. But as we all know, especially here in Philadelphia, with Andy Reid, everybody's got a shelf life. And at some point, everybody tends to stop listening to the message. And you need to move on. I could see that happening in Baltimore. And by the way, if that happens, I've always said that John Harbaugh would be the dream coach of Jeffrey Lurie.
I was just going to ask you that, John. I was just going to ask you if John Harbaugh did get let go by the Ravens, how fast is Jeff Lurie calling Howie Roseman saying, please get this guy?
Well, if you see the Eagles finish at 7-9 or 8-8, I think very quickly that call is made if John Harbaugh becomes available. If this team makes the playoffs or is 10-6 and is one and done, I don't think you can look in that direction. So a lot depends on what happens here with the Eagles. But there's no question that Jeffrey Lurie has tons of respect for John Harbaugh.
He is John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles insider. Also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. Follow him on Twitter for all your Eagles and NFL updates at JF McMullen. And check out 97.3 ESPN.com for all of John's latest articles, including the one he just posted about Jordan Hicks. Looks like he's going to be ready for the start of the season. John, appreciate the time. Catch up with you tomorrow.
Hey, thank you, guys.